Hey guys, how are you? I'm back with the video this week, and this week we're having a look at a book that I actually thought I'd leave for a while, but a couple of things happened in the past few days that made me think, actually I think this would be a good thing for us to talk about. But before we get there, remember there is our shop where we have books and writing services. We have our Redbubble shop where we have loads of designs if you want to support us that way. If you want to support us and you don't want to pay any bread, then like, subscribe, comment and share. Those things all help support us. But now onto our video. So before I introduce the video, I'll tell you a little bit about why I picked this video to do at this time. So two things happened over the weekend, or on Friday my time, that made me sort of think, okay, I won't leave this book on the shelf. I will actually pick it up, read it and talk about it this week, because it seems like I think this might be a topic that we need to consider. And that was in Melbourne at the dawn service for Anzac Day. A group of neo-Nazis booed the Welcome to Country, which is an incredibly shameful and racist thing to do. And then another thing that happened, and it's kind of trivial, but at the same time it's like nuance and context is really important, and I think that it couldn't go without being commented on, which is why it was commented on, which was a cutesy book haul with 4 books, 3 of which were either YA or romance, the 4th of which was a copy of Mein Kampf. And it was the lack of nuance and the juxtaposition of hated political manifesto against romantic YA. And a lot of people felt that was not something you could do, understandably. So that was a big, one of those storm in a teacup type of things that you're not going to notice unless you happen to be in that particular world. But it was interesting, and I think it's somewhat indicative of the times that we are living in. And so what book did I decide that we would have a look at? And this has a greeny cover, so I don't know what that's going to do to my screen. But Roberto Bolano's Nazi Literature in the Americas. This is a book that I decided, I saw and I thought, hey, that looks interesting. I have no idea what Roberto Bolano was like as a writer. I knew that he was a South American writer, he's a Chilean writer, but I thought, okay, let's have a look at this. This is definitely not in our magical realist writing. This is very much something else. So it's not in with those South American writers. What is this is a series of short biographies of Nazi or Nazi-adjacent writers in South America, Central America, and North America. Canada is not part of this group. There are no Canadians in here. And so because this was a writer I'd never read before, I read the book, and then I went and had a bit of a look at, how was this book received? What you know, the usual sort of backgroundy type of thing that I do. And this book was originally published in 1996, which is nearly 30 years ago. And the world of 1996 and the world of 2025 are very different worlds. So I think that meant that that I had a completely different reading to what the critics of the time had. Most of the critics of the time talked about this as being a book about that was a satire of the absurdity of literary hubris, of the vanity and the narcissism of writers, that, you know, the casual dismissal of an author's life work, these sorts of things, and that the use of the far right was, well, beyond just the far right, the extremist fascist element was sort of like a way of poking fun at the other end of the spectrum. So that's how it was read in 1996. I'm reading this in 2025, and reading it in a very different light. And I would suggest to the young lady who posted that picture, because she wanted to learn about that, this book might work better. This book might work much better. So it's divided into different sections, and different writers appear under the different sections. There are, so just the same as if you were categorizing writers. Most of these writers are poets. There is the Mendelus clan, which is a family. It's a mother and two of her offspring. There is Itinerant Heroes and the Fragility of Mirrors, or the Fragility of Mirrors, which is two writers who were friends. There is Forerunners and Figures of the Anti-Enlightenment. So these are writers of an earlier period than the fascist period of Europe, so the post-war period, post-First World War period of Europe, because this being a Latin American writer, the close ties to Spain, you have not just Nazis, but you also have Franco's fascists. So that this is not just poking at fascism in Germany, but poking at fascism in Spain as well. The poets Maudits, Wandering Women of Letters, Two Germans at the Ends of the Earth, Speculative and Science Fiction, Magicians, Mercenaries and Miserable Creatures, The Many Masks of Max Mirabilis, North American Poets, The Aryan Brotherhood, The Fabulous Schifano Boys, The Infamous Ramirez Hoffman, and Epilogue for Monsters. So each of these has different writers underneath. Each of the writers is categorized based on their writing, what has them in common, either that they knew one another or that they were rivals of one another. The Wandering Women are rivals, but all of whom are Nazis. And so you read this, and it is an exceptionally dark book. It is an exceptionally dark book for a book that has nothing graphic in it, that grows more violent in some respects towards the end, or the writers grow more violent. Not that the two people who go off and enlist to fight for Franco's lot in the Spanish Civil War and then fight for the Nazis is not violent, but it's not graphic. None of it is graphic, but the violence becomes, if we would say that military violence is authorized violence, then football hooligans and serial killers are on the unauthorized violence end of things. And so you go through this and you see these people who are either seduced by Nazism. The Mirabellis family are definitely seduced by their mother going to Germany. There are others who are just cranks, crackpots, people with an axe to bear, the miserable, the mediocre, the people who are looking for someone to blame for their miserable lives and don't want to take any kind of level of responsibility for that. There are downright psychopaths. There are the people who are like, oh Lord, do we have to invite Uncle Frank to Christmas dinner? He always goes on and on. So people like that, real people who are just, and their writing is considered just drivel, unreadable drivel. There is actually a line that is the end of one of these writers. So to give you an idea of what some of these writers are like, this is the last lines of one of these authors. This one is Silvio Salavitico, who is in one of the forerunners and figures of the anti-Enlightenment. And the last lines, the last sentences of his entry are, his books were never republished, his manuscripts were probably thrown out with the trash or burned by the orderlies. So these are people who are losers. They're also incredibly banal. This book leans into the fact that these sorts of political extremists are losers and boring. But, and this is the important thing, that doesn't mean they're not dangerous. Especially as you get towards the end of the book, and the disordered violence of these people is exacerbated. It's not focused. It is this unfocused violence. And it's an unfocused violence that it isolates them, but it also makes them incredibly dangerous. And it's why these people get used by these sorts of regimes, because they have a propensity to violence whether the regime is in power or not. But the regime can then use that violence to a point, and then once it's no longer useful, you use someone else to get rid of them. They are useful idiots, or in this case, useful psychopaths. So the banality of them is also something that is emphasized over and over and over again. These are very boring, sad people. They have little in the way of community or friendship. Even the community that they create amongst themselves is not really community, because these are not people capable of the emotional work to create real community. There are people who are escaped Nazis. There are people who are the children of escaped Nazis. There are people who are the willing foot soldiers of authoritarian right-wing governments like Pinochet's. So the whole book is full of these very nasty people. It ends up being very, very dark. an incredibly dark book. I finished it off and I was like, I read it fairly quickly because I wanted, in some way, the more you read of it, the darker it feels and the more you want to sort of, I'd like to leave now. And I think the reason why I think this is a really good book to have a look at if you want to understand this, because losers that these people are, what comes strikingly across is how banal evil is. That is the whole thing that came apparent when, during the Nuremberg trials, when Eichmann was on trial, is how banal this man was. This man who orchestrated the deaths of millions was just a banal little pen pusher. And so that is really emphasized, and I think that that is one of the things that really annoys me. One of the things that really annoys me, and anyone who knows me will know this, is I find the fact that people are, well, like my age, are reading children's literature. They're reading The Hunger Games and they're reading Harry Potter and they're reading comic books, and it's like, oh, but we'll recognize the baddies. No, you won't. Because the baddies aren't charismatic. The baddies aren't obvious. They're not sitting there twirling their mustaches. They're banal. But what they are the most banal people. You might have a charismatic leader. Not even always that. Sometimes you'll just have somebody who was opportunistic and was in a position to take power. But you will often get one person who's charismatic. But one person who's charismatic can't do much. Cult leaders are an example of that. They can do a lot of damage, but to a much smaller number of people. You know, I mean, the world there are hundreds, if not thousands, of cult leaders around the world who have been charismatic enough to draw people into their orbit and to do enormous damage. But there's one of them. The danger is in all of these boring little people who will do this, who will believe it and who will do it, and they don't look like your big, fancy, throwing fire baddie. They don't look like that. They are boring. They are banal. You can't expect to see them there. So it annoys me because it means that people are saying, oh, but I would see. What? What are you going to see? What are you going to see? Meanwhile, the thing that is insidious about these writers is for every single writer in this book who has their writing discarded, has their writing ignored, who is considered a crank or a crackpot, there are others who are fated, who are published. Not every writer in this book is published under the obvious fascist publishing houses, the obvious Nazi publishing houses that are listed in the back of the book, the Aryan Brotherhood, things like that. Some of these writers, many of these writers are published by mainstream publishers. Many of these writers are given press or given platforms. Even the soccer hooligan is given a platform in the national press. Many of these writers, their ideas are not challenged. So the question then has to be not just, oh, if we get rid of these bad people, if we get rid of them, even if we can recognize the banality of evil, how much does the society enable these ideas? Which is is the really important part, is how much of a platform are we going to give before we say, oh no, that's too far. Because that's what happens to most of these writers, is they're platformed for a long time, sometimes even once it is recognized what they are still platformed. And then it's well, why is this thriving in our community? Well, because you are disseminating these ideas, and the community is allowing these ideas to be proliferated. That is part of the danger of these banal people. And what are these ideas? Although we don't have the books themselves that these writers write, there are clues as to what these ideas contain. They are violent. That's one thing. Now, violence is not inherently one side or another. Violence, depending on how you write about it, can be have an entirely different outcome. You know, I mean, we did A Clockwork Orange. I enjoy A Clockwork Orange. Doesn't mean I'm suddenly going to turn into Alex. But it's the glorification of violence. The idea that violence is a good that you see in these writers. There is this authoritarian, this subject to authority, or this in some ways a sort of a hyper-individualistic resisting of community, but creating collectives, which is kind of it's sort of a weird tension that it's like community involves other people having a say, having a place, whereas these collectives that they create revolve around a single strong leader. So that subjugation of the will to the will of a single leader or idea, that is an element of it. It's also there is, for all the masculinity of it, it is the masculinity that is harmful. It is the kind of masculinity that limits a male expression of self. It is the homophobic masculinity, which in many of these cases appears to be covering the latent homosexuality of these writers themselves. It is the misogyny. There are about 4 women in the book in total, out of about 30 writers. This is a place where male voices have supremacy. Female voices are not encouraged. They are basically tolerated. And even then, not particularly. The 2 of the women are more like, they're less writers and more facilitators of writing, running magazines or publishing ventures for men to fill. They are racist. So, which goes without saying, I mean, Nazism is a racist ideology. These are racists. So, these are things that, how much of these are we letting in? So you take a society that is already conservative. You take a religious structure that is male-dominated. How many of these ideas are already mainstreamed? And therefore, how much fertile ground is there for these much more radical ideologies to take root? That is what makes these so dangerous. That is why it's not a question, I think, of oh, censorship. No, it's a question of what in our society allows this banal evil to flourish. And why are we creating a situation where there is fertile ground for this? Why have we created, as a society, why do we create a position where this stuff will find good ground to grow in and not just barren sand? We want this to fall on the sand. To challenge this is not to be a hero against a charismatic leader and fight a fight. It is to make these arguments, as obviously vile and disgusting as they are, to make a society insensitive to them, to make it so these ideas fall on the rock, so there is no chance of them growing, so that these people are booed off the stage. That is how you fight this. You don't fight this through direct attack until it has gone too far and it's become as enmeshed into your government or into your society to such an extent. What you want to do to prevent these vile creatures springing up is to not provide the fertile soil in the first place. And that is in every person's power. And I think that is what makes this book really worth having a look at. It is worth seeing how banal evil is and how easy it is to trip down that path. If you are in a position where, oh, I'll let this go, or I'll let this go. Fighting this is fought comment and action at a time. You can be that hero, but you're that hero by saying, oh mate, that's not cool. That's not cool, man. That's not cool. It comes every time you challenge someone who disrespects a person's autonomy, who disrespects a person's right to exist. And this is coming from a writer, a Chilean writer who is going to know this, who is going to understand this, who is living he's dead now, who lived in a country and a culture where this was allowed to take root. Okay, with help from the CIA. But it was allowed to take root, and then it was allowed to hold that for a very long time. So that's the value of something like this. Yes, it looks initially like, well, what is this about? But it's actually talking about so much. You don't learn how to fight fascism from a children's book. You learn it by recognizing the banality of evil and the insidious nature of the ideas when they are allowed to grow in the mainstream. And that is why I would recommend that you read this book. So it was a pretty dark book this week. Her Infernal Majesty will be here next week with a nice frothy Georgian comedy, which is She Stoops to Conquer. So I hope you enjoy that. Serious book this week, serious topic, but I felt that I really wanted to talk about this while it seemed relevant to things, and I was thinking about things along these lines anyway. So I'll be back next time, probably with something a lot lighter, hopefully. And anyway, so peace, guys. Peace and love. Peace and love. If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books and other writing services to help with your writing.